Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles. Welcome to Eagle News International. Here are tonight's headlines. Thousands of people were ordered to evacuate from their homes near a Philippine volcano. The Taal volcano, after an eruption, sent ash and steam hundreds of meters into the sky. Russia has signaled it may dial back its war aims to focus on eastern Ukraine. At the UN Security Council, the United States said the recent launches were increasingly dangerous provocations and called for a resolution to update and strengthen the sanctions regime against Pyongyang. First in our news, thousands of people were ordered to evacuate from their homes near Taal volcano after an eruption sent ash and steam hundreds of meters into the sky. Taal volcano, which sits in a lake south of Manila, exploded with a short-lived burst at 7:22 in the morning, according to the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology in a statement. It also warned further eruptions were possible, which it said could trigger dangerous fast-moving volcanic flows of gas, ash, and debris, as well as a tsunami. The seismology agency strongly recommended residents living in vulnerable communities around the lake may be evacuated as it raised the alert level from 2 to 3. The initial eruption was followed by nearly continuous phreatomagmatic activity that sent plumes stretching 1,500 meters into the air. A phreatomagmatic eruption happens when molten rock comes into contact with underground or surface water, according to Princess Cosalan, a scientist at the agency, likening it to a pouring water on a hot pan. Cosalan also said that ash and steam emissions had quietened in the hours after the initial burst, but she also said the institute's on-site sensors continued to detect volcanic earthquakes and another eruption was possible. Meanwhile, Russia has signaled it may dial back its war aims to focus on eastern Ukraine. This after failing to break the nation's resistance in a month of fighting and attacks on civilians, including up to 300 feared killed in the bombing of a theater. The possible shift came ahead of a planned meeting by U.S. President Joe Biden with Ukrainian refugees in Poland and talks with his Polish counterpart Andrzej Duda in Warsaw before he gives a speech on the brutal war, according to the White House. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin had ordered the February invasion to destroy Ukraine's military and topple pro-Western President Volodymyr Zelensky, bringing the country under Russia's sway. But Sergei Rudskoy, a senior general, suggested a considerably reduced main goal of controlling Donbass, an eastern region already partly held by Russian proxies. His surprise statement came as a Western official reported that a 7th Russian general, Lieutenant General Yakov Ryazantsev, had died in Ukraine and that a colonel had been deliberately killed by his own demoralized men. And visiting Reskov, about 80 kilometers from Ukraine, President Biden praised Ukraine's incredible resistance, comparing the conflict to a bigger version of Communist China's 1989 crushing of protest in Tiananmen Square. President Biden told soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division that the struggle in Eastern Europe represents a historic inflection point. He was also being briefed on the dire humanitarian situation in Ukraine, which more than 3.7 million people have fled, mostly to Poland. And the UN also believes that more than half of Ukraine's children have already been driven from their homes.
I really mean it. Thank you.
Meanwhile, the United Nations said that some 3.7 million people have fled Ukraine since Russia's invasion a month ago. Take a look.
Well, we're here with our colleagues from UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. We've seen a really huge refugee situation erupt over the past few weeks. More than 3 million people have fled Ukraine, and many of them are coming through this border crossing. Today, as we speak, we're still seeing new arrivals, women, children, older people, people with disabilities, people with specific needs, and they're crossing through. There's a lot going on. They're receiving assistance, but many of them have really long, arduous journeys. And so there is a big effort by civil society, by humanitarians, by the authorities to really try and help and support them. So they're exhausted. There are also some children, and many children with families, but it's also the case that some children have come across by themselves. So they need to be, they need to have care arrangements in place. They need to be identified, placed in protection or care with the national authorities. But there are a whole suite of interventions that are happening to support people, because you'll see, I mean, people are just holding their belongings, whatever they can find, whatever they've taken with them.
Before the crisis sparked a month ago, EU member Poland was home to around 1.5 million Ukrainians. In total, more than 10 million people, over a quarter of the population in regions under government control before the February 24 invasion, are now thought to have fled their homes, including nearly 6.5 million who are internally displaced. Ukraine's refugee crisis is Europe's worst since World War II. The UN Children's Agency UNICEF said Thursday that 4.3 million children, more than half of Ukraine's estimated 7.5 million population, had been forced to leave their homes. And for her 4th birthday, little Daria got a bus ride out of Irpin as her present. Her family were among the last to leave the town of Kiev's northwest, scene of some of the worst fighting in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Take a look.
Дар'я.
Як звати сина і чоловіка?
Єгор і Анатолій. Планували свічки, готували і торт. Все осталось там. Попала бомба в дом, и повылетали окна, двери.
І все.
И решили уехать.
А цих останні дні не можна, з підвала не можна вилізти, не можна до дома. Всі стекла повитрогані, криші позривані, і то все немає ні води, ні світу, вже неділь 3, ні газу, холодно, і то сильно важко в час.
Вони взагалі дуже дружелюбні, дуже компанійські, але бояться вибухів, бояться стрілянини. Ну, такі. Оставити я їх не могла.
Meanwhile, the Russian army updated its losses in Ukraine to 1,351 soldiers, while saying that it had evacuated more than 400,000 civilians and condemning Western supplies of weapons to Kiev. At a Moscow briefing, a senior representative of the General Staff, Sergei Rudskoy, said that, quote, "We consider a huge mistake that supplies of arms to Kiev are being sent by Western countries." Take a look.
Первый заместитель начальника Генерального штаба Вооруженных сил Российской Федерации. Это позволило спасти десятки, если не сотни тысяч мирных жителей Донбасса.
И минимизации ущерба для мирного населения. С началом с Запорожской области общественность и отдельные эксперты задаются вопросом.
Rudskoy said that Russia was carrying out an operation on the whole territory of Ukraine. He also claimed that Ukraine had lost 14,000 troops while 16,000 were wounded. In Brussels on Thursday for NATO, EU and G7 summits, President Biden said the transatlantic alliance would respond if Russian leader Vladimir Putin does use chemical warfare. Ken Cruz from our Washington, D.C. Bureau reports.
After warning that Russian President Vladimir Putin may use biological weapons in Ukraine, President Joe Biden at an emergency NATO summit declares the U.S. will take action if there is a chemical attack.
We would respond. We would respond if he uses it. The nature of the response would depend on the nature of the use.
There's still no specifics on whether military force is on the table.
If chemical weapons were used in Ukraine, would that trigger a military response from NATO?
It would trigger a response in kind. Whether or not you're asking whether NATO would cross, we'd make that decision at the time.
The president says the summit with leaders of NATO, the G7, and the EU is sending an unmistakable message to Putin.
Putin was banking on NATO being split. My early conversation with him in December and early January, it was clear to me he didn't think we could sustain this cohesion. NATO has never been more united than it is today. Putin is getting exactly the opposite what he intended to have as a consequence of going into Ukraine.
President Biden and NATO again announced new penalties against Russia, including new ones on Russian lawmakers.
We're also announcing new sanctions of more than 400 individuals and entities in alignment with the European Union. More than 300 members of the Duma, oligarchs, and Russian defense companies that fuel the Russian war machine.
And $1 billion in humanitarian aid for Ukraine.
And today, I'm announcing the United States is prepared to commit more than $1 billion in humanitarian assistance to help get relief to millions of Ukrainians affected by the war in Ukraine.
But Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking via video in the summit, presses them to flood weapons into Ukraine. He says the West should provide all the weapons needed to prevent the deaths of Ukrainians from Russian strikes from Russian occupation. Zelensky says that Russia was using phosphorus bombs, which causes severe burns, conducting indiscriminate shelling of civilians, and could resort to full-scale use of chemical weapons. He was sharply critical to the U.S. and NATO for not doing more, saying Ukrainians are dying, and says NATO has yet to show what it can do to save people, pleading for fighter jets, tanks, and a no-fly zone. Meanwhile, President Biden says he wants to see Russia thrown out of the G20 club of leading economic nations.
Yes, that depends on the G20. That was raised today, and I raised the possibility if that can't be done, if Indonesia and others do not agree, then we should, in my view, ask to have both Ukraine be able to attend the meetings.
He also says China, which, like much of Europe, still buys Russian oil and gas, so far has not given Russia more military aid.
China understands that its economic future is much more closely tied to the West than it is to Russia. And so I'm hopeful that he does not get engaged.
The U.S. and its allies have unleashed significant sanctions against Russia for the invasion, but those penalties have not deterred Russian President Vladimir Putin. However, President Biden suggests that sanctions were not meant to deter the actions of Putin.
And I did not say that, in fact, the sanctions would deter him. Sanctions never deter. The maintenance of sanctions, the increasing the pain, and the demonstration why I asked for this NATO meeting today is to be sure that after a month we will sustain what we're doing, not just next month, the following month, but for the remainder of this entire year. That's what will stop him.
Russia's isolation on the world stage has been underscored by a second non-binding UN General Assembly resolution demanding an immediate halt to the war, which has been approved by 140 countries, with 38 abstaining and 5 voting against. Ken Cruz, Eagle News, Washington. Back to you, Alma.
Thanks, Ken. 1 month after the start of the war in Ukraine, UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador Orlando Bloom visited Moldova to meet children and families fleeing Ukraine as refugees. During the 2-day trip, Bloom visited a UNICEF-supported Blue Dot space in Palanca, southwest Moldova, where women and children stop for rest and support as they cross the border from Ukraine in search of safety. Take a look.
When we see conflict like this, and you realize that it's all about the children and what their future will be, and it's so uncertain because nothing is certain when they're fleeing a war. Bucharest. Oh, okay. And who did you come with? Your mama?
Yes.
Have you got brothers and sisters?
Yes, brother.
One brother, you and your brother?
Yes.
Okay. And where did you come from today?
Одесса.
Odessa. Okay. How long did it take?
4 часа где-то.
Around 4 hours.
Okay. You left this morning?
Вы сегодня утром выехали оттуда?
Yes.
Okay. And who'd you come with?
С кем ты приехала?
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. That's so sweet.
Orlando
My daughter will
Bloom
love
said
this. Thank you so
that
much.
many families and children, he spoke with many families and children who have not only left their homes, but also their school, friends, family members, and almost everything they own. Bloom, who also visited eastern Ukraine with UNICEF in 2016, said the blue dots set up by UNICEF on the borders are a vital first stop for mothers desperately looking for some respite and a safe place for children to play. UNICEF recently warned of the heightened risk of trafficking and exploitation as millions of children flee the war and countless others are displaced by violence inside Ukraine. In response, UNICEF and partners are scaling up blue dots in refugee-hosting countries, including Moldova, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia, and calling on governments in the region to put measures in place to keep children safe. And this includes strengthening child protection screenings at border crossings.
Oh, very good.
Meanwhile, the Philippines has joined 139 other countries in voting for a UN General Assembly resolution on the scale of humanitarian woes caused by Russia's attack on Ukraine. During the 11th emergency special session on March 24, the UNGA adopted Resolution A/ES-11/L.2 on the humanitarian consequences of the aggression against the Eastern European nation, with 140 countries, including the Philippines, voting in favor, 38 abstentions, 5 against, Russia, Syria, North Korea, Eritrea, and Belarus. In a statement on Friday, the European Union thanked the Philippine government for voting in favor of the resolution. The resolution also recognized that Russia's military offensive and its humanitarian consequences are on a scale that has not been seen in Europe in many decades. The Assembly demanded full protection for civilians, including humanitarian personnel, journalists, and persons in vulnerable situations, women and children among them. It further demanded full respect for all medical personnel and humanitarian personnel exclusively engaged in medical duties. Meanwhile, the UN Conference on Trade and Development, or UNCTAD, said in its global economic outlook that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has been the main contributing factor to the potentially devastating 1% drop in projected global economic growth this year.
There is a rapidly worsening outlook for the world economy. And to think that this year, the year after 2 years of crisis with COVID-19, the average rate of growth of the world economy will be 2.6%, down from 5.5% 5% last year and down from the projections that were made in the last quarter of 2021. The conditions are worsening for everybody because on top of the problem of climate change, and the IPCC report was mentioned, and you have been seeing these days, the reports on the Horn of Africa and the drought that is really affecting these countries. On top of that, we have still the consequences of COVID-19. We are not yet in a post-COVID era. You are seeing what is happening now in China, where new lockdowns are being put in place. And on top of that, we have the war in Ukraine. Grant is being carried by the developing countries because of the rise in prices of food, of energy, on fertilizers, that is very steep, and also the financial stretch under which the developing countries are already under.
All regions of the global economy will be adversely affected by this crisis, some more than others. And of course, there will be winners, particularly high commodity exporters, but the European Union will see a fairly significant downgrade in its growth performance this year, but so will parts of Central and Southern Asia as well.
Now, rising inflation is making matters worse for developing countries already weighed down by a $1 trillion debt burden to pay back to creditors. UNCTAD noted that even relatively wealthy countries have already sought help from the international banking system, including Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Egypt. And up next, North Korea likely has more in store after successfully test firing its largest ever intercontinental ballistic missile, as Washington called for tougher international sanctions at the UN Security Council. That and more when Eagle News returns.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Ilalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back. North Korea has likely more in store after successfully test firing its largest ever intercontinental ballistic missile, according to a top U.S. official, as Washington called for tougher international sanctions at the UN Security Council. Thursday's launch was the first time that Pyongyang has fired Kim Jong-un's most powerful missiles at full range since 2017. It was also conducted under Kim's direct guidance and ensures his country is ready for, quote, long-standing confrontation with the United States. That, according to state media outlet KCNA, reporting this on Friday. We see this as part of a pattern of testing and provocation from North Korea. We think there is likely more in store, according to White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, telling reporters traveling on board Air Force One with President Joe Biden. The missile appears to have traveled higher and further than any previous ICBM tested by the nuclear-armed country, including one designed to strike anywhere on the U.S. mainland. Known as the Hwasong-17, the giant ICBM launched Thursday was first unveiled in October 2020 and dubbed a monster missile by analysts. It had never previously been successfully test-fired. And at the UN Security Council, the United States said the recent launches were increasingly dangerous provocations. And they called for a resolution to update and strengthen the sanctions regime against Pyongyang. Take a look.
And because of DPRK's increasingly dangerous provocations, the United States will be introducing a Chapter 7 Security Council resolution to update and strengthen the sanctions regime.
We should urgently, therefore, consider further steps that this Council can take, including updated and targeted sanctions to disrupt North Korea's unlawful testing and illicit proliferation.
China addressed the Security Council meeting and urged prudence and reason regarding North Korea. All is not quiet on the international front. No party should take any action that would lead to greater tensions. That, according to China's UN Ambassador Zhang Jun. Russia, for its part, warned against following Washington's lead on tightening sanctions. Deputy Russian envoy to the UN, Anna Evstignieva, said that Moscow believes that doing so would go beyond the framework of cutting off financing for the DPRK missile and nuclear programs and would threaten North Korean citizens with unacceptable social, economic, and humanitarian problems. In other news, a Yemeni rebel attack on a Saudi oil plant set off a huge fire near Jeddah's Formula One circuit during practice sessions on Friday, part of a wave of assaults on Aramco facilities. Smoke billowed near the circuit and drivers complained of the smell, in most visible of 16 drone and missile attacks claimed by the Iran-backed rebels around the country. The wave of assaults comes ahead of the 7th anniversary of a Saudi-led coalition's military intervention against the Houthis in Yemen, a country in the grips of a major humanitarian crisis. Oil prices have soared since Russia's invasion of Ukraine sparked supply fears, prompting Western powers to implore OPEC countries to ramp up production. Houthi military spokesman Haya Sari said facilities of oil giant Aramco were also attacked in Jizan, Najran, Ras Tanura, and Rabig with a large number of drones. And about 24 girls and women chanting "Open the Schools" protested in the Afghan capital today against the Taliban's decision to shut their secondary schools just hours after reopening them this week. Thousands of jubilant girls across Afghanistan had flocked to learning institutions on Wednesday, the date the Education Ministry had set for classes to resume. But just hours into the first day, the ministry announced a shock policy reversal that left youngsters saying they felt betrayed and foreign governments expressing outrage. Since returning to power on August 15, the Taliban have rolled back 2 decades of gains made by the country's women who have been squeezed out of many government jobs, barred from traveling alone, and ordered to dress according to a strict interpretation of the Quran. The Taliban had promised a softer version of the harsh Islamist rule that characterized their first stint in power from 1996 to 2001. In other news, Nevada is joining Oregon and Washington in the Northwest Prescription Drug Consortium. It's a partnership that allows residents to use drug discount cards to purchase prescription drugs at a lower cost. Our correspondent from the U.S., Anna Cui, reports from Las Vegas, Nevada. Anna.
Nevada joins the Northwest Prescription Drug Consortium with the goal of reducing costs for prescription drugs. The program is operated by Oregon and Washington and will be of no cost to Nevada due to bills passed in the 2021 legislative session, including Senate Bill 380 and Senate Bill 396, which allow the state to work with other entities to purchase prescription drugs. Dr. Beth Slamowitz, Senior Policy Advisor on Pharmacy with the Nevada Department of Health and Human Services, says it's a great opportunity for the people of Nevada who face high costs for their vital prescription medications, according to the press release. This comes as prices for food, gas, and housing continue to rise in Nevada, so residents are looking forward to this opportunity to be able to save on their prescriptions. We spoke with Jackie, a local Las Vegas resident whose husband had to be hospitalized late last year and was started on Eliquis, a blood thinner used to prevent serious blood clots. According to Jackie, their copay is $387 for a 30-day supply. The consortium may benefit Nevadans like John, who has a prescription drug plan but is on a medication with high copay. It may also allow consumers who are uninsured or underinsured to save up to 80% on generics and up to 20% on brand name drugs through the Array RX card. It's a discount card program which is said to be accepted by over 65,000 pharmacies nationwide. Consumers can choose to use it or their current prescription plan benefit, whichever gives them the lower price. According to the Array RX card website, there is no membership fee to join the program, no age or income restrictions, and all FDA-approved prescriptions are eligible for a discount. The program implementation is still in its beginning phase in Nevada, and according to the website, Nevada residents can start enrollment in the summer of 2022. Anna Cui, Eagle News, Las Vegas, Nevada.
Thanks, Anna. The number of coronavirus cases in the Philippines is on a steady decline since the Omicron wave last January. The number of infections in recent week has gone down by 15% compared to last week. That's according to Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergere. Let's listen in.
Bumaba na po ng 15% mula nung nakaraang linggo ang bilang ng mga kaso sa ating bansa. Sa kasalukuyan, tinataya po na 454 new cases ang mayroon tayo kada araw. Mas mababa po ito ng kaunti kumpara nung nag-umpisa tayo noong nakaraang Disyembre na nasa 490 cases kada araw. Ito po ay noong bago po tayo tamaan ng Omicron variant. Ang pagbaba ng mga kaso ay hindi lamang makikita sa Luzon, kung hindi pati na rin po makikita sa Visayas at sa Mindanao. Kaya naman po tuloy-tuloy lamang po tayo sa pagsunod sa ating minimum public health standard. Dahil bumaba na ng 75% ang ating national admissions mula sa peak na 5,218 admissions noong Enero. Nakikita po na nagplaplateau na nitong mga nakaraang araw. Nananatili po tayo na nasa low risk sa ating total bed utilization na nasa 17%. Bumaba rin po ang bilang ng ating mga kababayan na na-admit sa ating ICU na nasa ngayon ay nasa 575 admissions na lamang. Bumaba po ito ng 71% mula po nung tumaas ang kaso noong Enero. Sa kabilang banda, nakakita po tayo ng bahagyang pagbaba sa bilang ng mga available na ICU beds. Gayunpaman, nananatili pa rin na nasa low risk ang ating ICU utilization na nasa 16%.
Meanwhile, Singapore will lift restrictions for all vaccinated travelers from next week, with Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong hailing it as a major step in the aviation hub's efforts to live with the coronavirus. Take a look.
The Omicron situation is well under control.
Nearly all our cases are domestic, originating within the community. Arrivals from abroad constitute only a very small proportion of cases. We can therefore safely open up our borders. We will drastically streamline testing and quarantine requirements for travelers. This simplified vaccination travel framework will let Singaporeans travel abroad more easily, almost like before COVID-19. It will also lift most restrictions for fully vaccinated visitors entering Singapore. This will reconnect Singapore with the world. It will give a much-needed boost to businesses, particularly the tourism sector. And it will help Singapore reclaim its position as a business and aviation hub. These domestic and cross-border changes represent a major step towards living with COVID-19. But they stop short of a complete opening up. We remain watchful because COVID-19 may yet bring further surprises.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Tinatayang nasa 63 million na individuals ang gumagamit ng cryptocurrency at blockchain wallet para sa kanilang mga bayarin at transaksyon. May ilan pang ang naniniwala na mas maaasahan ito kaysa sa traditional na transaction records at database. Ano nga ba ang dapat na malaman bago mag-invest sa cryptocurrency? Ano ang mga karaniwang pagkakamali ng crypto users? We'll answer these questions with the help of our guest, Mr. James Dongla, President and CEO of My Services Shop Incorporated.
Blockchain is the only technology na hindi po nahahack.
If you don't embrace the change, mahirap sa organization to grow.
All these in this episode of Open for Business.
Hi guys, ako nga pala si Raymar ng Nemic at abangan niyo po kami bilang guest performer sa #Letters and Music ngayong darating na linggo, March 27, 1 to 2 p.m. Siyempre, dito lamang yan sa Net25. See you po!
Welcome back. The Iglesia Ni Cristo members from the District of Greater Toronto traveled to Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario to participate in an aid to humanity activity which was approved by the church administration under the leadership of the Executive Minister, Brother Eduardo Manalo. Among the recipients are Filipino students. Here's Ashley Sakmar.
Pursuing education is already a huge undertaking, but doing it while being far away from your family makes the road for any student even tougher. Add to that the financial challenges brought about by a global pandemic. It's during these challenging times when people find and form a new community to support each other. In Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, Canada, the Felix Y. Manalo Foundation, as they have done many times in the past, has generously supported this growing Filipino community of students. Sunday, March 20th, marked the first time the FYM Foundation reached Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, 700 kilometers or a 7-hour drive from the city of Toronto. Led by their ministers and workers, the FYM Foundation held a special program to meet the Filipino students living far away from their families. Vitamins, medications, and personal hygiene products were also included in the food packages given to the Filipino students studying at Sioux College.
One of the Sioux College Student Union services is the food bank, which is an essential services that we provide to make sure that our students are well fed and they are food secured. And today we're receiving a generous donation from Church of Christ, and it was really great to see human and people coming together in the community group, helping each other and helping our students.
The program was a wonderful opportunity to meet other Filipinos who are on the same page, studying and working very hard while being very far away from their family. A story so common to most Filipinos as they strive hard to give their family a good, stable future. Ashley Sakmar, Eagle News, Toronto.
And the Church of Christ in Thailand recently mobilized its members in a campaign to plant trees, an activity the church fully endorses to protect the environment. Here's Gila Pablo for the report. Gila.
Beautifying the community and to provide safer environment are some of the aims of the members of the Church of Christ that have gathered here in Bang Chang District, Rayong, Thailand, to voluntarily participate in the tree planting activity under the INC Giving and in cooperation with Felix Y. Manalo Foundation. The volunteers traveled for approximately 2 hours from Thailand's capital city, Bangkok, to Rayong province, which is also known as one of Thailand's tourist destinations. The volunteers followed the imposed outdoor health protocols to effectively prevent the spread of the COVID-19. Wearing of masks, social distancing, and antigen tests were adhered by the volunteers.
ต้องขอขอบคุณท่านเอ็ดวาโดวีมาลานโดนะครับและสมาชิกนะครับที่มาช่วยปลูกป่าซึ่งเกิดประโยชน์แก่ชุมชนนะครับในท้องถิ่นนะครับซึ่งที่สาธารณะแห่งนี้เป็นสถานที่สาธารณะที่เรามีโครงการที่ทำเป็นปลอดชุมชนนะครับเป็นสวนสุขภาพรวมทั้งเป็นที่ปลูกพืชสมุนไพรนะครับให้เกิดประโยชน์ให้แก่พี่น้องประชาชนชาวสำนักท้อนนะครับ
Before we even plan for every church activity, the very first thing that we do is to seek the help and guidance of the Almighty God through our prayers. Then other preparations kick in, such as coordination with government agencies, securing needed resources, and laying out the detailed plan and schedule. Everyone who witnessed this activity surely saw and felt the joy and enthusiasm of the church members who participated. This shows that our happiness truly comes from fulfilling our God-given duties, one of which is to be united with the church administration in all the church endeavors. We are indeed very grateful to our beloved executive minister, Brother Eduardo V. Manalo, for allowing us to conduct this activity. We continue to promise po that we will be united with you in being zealous in our services to our Almighty God.
The preservation of natural environment has played an indeed significant role in Thailand to support different industries, especially the tourism sector. Despite the pandemic, Iglesia Ni Cristo members have expressed their volunteerism to help the community. In addition to conducting humanitarian acts, they're also committed in protecting the environment. Reporting from Rayong, Thailand, this is Sheila Pablo. We live in interesting times.
The Los Angeles Marathon, an annual running event typically held each spring in Los Angeles, California, kicked off last March 20. And at the scene are Alan and Eva Basilyahe. Hello, guys.
The 2021 Los Angeles Marathon was moved from March to November last year due to the pandemic. But for 2022, LA's big race has returned to its traditional March month.
Despite the quicker turnaround, defending men's champion John Carrero Kenya succeeded in his goal to secure back-to-back LA Marathon victories.
I'm feeling very good, very excited. I'm very excited. It will be bigger than last year because I did my PR today. Today was a lot of windy and hotter, so we try our best. So I'll go and take 1 month for a break, and I'll start my training on April.
Carrero beat his 2021 time by over 3 minutes, coming in at 2:09.08. And in the women's field, it was fellow Kenyan Delvine Merengor who took top honors with a time of 2:25.04. Aside from claiming victory in the women's division, Merengor also grabbed the $10,000 Quincy Cass Associates Marathon Challenge bonus by being the first runner to cross the finish line.
I prepare well from December up to now. You see, I was so fantastic today to be my time. Yeah, it is my day. Yeah, it is nice because even the weather it's almost like Kenya. Yeah, because I see it is not cold. For me to run in cold may be big problem. Yeah. They were so happy. Even in a lot of streets, they were cheering for me. Yeah, to be first challenge of a male. Yeah, it's a nice city, a lot of buildings. It's an amazing country.
In fourth place, top American finisher Tyler McCandless completed the marathon with a respectable time of 2:15.19.
I came here and executed on a big stage and a pretty big major marathon. I've been training really hard and have a decade of training under Coach Steve Jones. I was just really proud to come out and execute and run a really good race today. It's pretty special, and the crowds get pretty wild the last 10 miles or so, and I felt like it was happening over the last 10K, and that was a pretty special moment in those last 10 miles, 10K of running.
For some runners, participating in a marathon provides an opportunity to bring their experiences and philosophies along the race course and hopefully also share them with others at the finish line.
I was wrongfully convicted of 60 years to life. I spent more than 10 years in solitary confinement. I began studying the law. In solitary confinement, I got myself out. Now I'm on my way. I'm on my way. I'm applying to law school right now to continue to help others. I've been through so much worse, and I remind myself I don't have to run a marathon. I get to run a marathon. No matter what happens, I've already won.
So this guy here is doing his 300 marathons right now, and last year he's turning 70. 70 years.
Cara, não tem desculpa. Eu acho que correr é uma atividade muito democrática, fácil de praticar. Não tem idade, né? Qualquer idade você pode e é fácil, né? Vestir calção e tênis, você sai por aí para correr em qualquer lugar.
You know, there's no excuse. You know, do the first step. Running so democratic, you know, just need a shoe, sometimes not even shoe, and do it.
Having the city to ourselves was just so cool. Like all like-minded runners just taking over the entire streets. Like sometimes when it was downhill and I was just looking at the sea of runners, no cars, it was just so liberating. I loved it.
It was really cool. I tried to remind myself the whole time to just take it in. You know, running past the Hollywood sign, running past the Oscars, all that stuff was unbelievable. So it was a really cool way to see the city.
Running through the streets of LA, I feel like it's a nice little tour. You know, even if you live here, you get to see some things that you might not normally pay attention to when you're driving.
You know, it was really exciting to, especially mile 6, 7, 8, which was I live in Silver Lake, and we ran that stretch on Sunset Boulevard the past 3 months, like every day, and it was really cool to be able to run in the middle of the road.
Well, if you want to run a marathon, the first thing is you have to think you can run a marathon. If you ask most people, they'll go, no, I can't. Take it one step at a time. Your first marathon's going to be horrible, but you'll learn. My first marathon was like 6 hours. This one I just finished like 3:34. So, you know, you get better. You just keep practicing. Keep them to keep you motivated, and like get a group of friends that'll do it with you too.
I think training for a marathon is like a good metaphor for life. If you set such a big goal, it helps you achieve small goals on the way. And so break it up. Start small. You don't start by training 26. You build up into it. And, that can be an example for anything you're trying to achieve. Start small, see what you can do each day to achieve the end result.
Whether a basketball dribbler or a life-size teddy bear. The common message that every runner shared was that all are welcome.
Even if you're a T-Rex? Just trying to fit in.
Ivan Allen, Eagle News, Los Angeles.
Thanks, guys. As always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert, stay informed, because we live in interesting times. Good night.
Nang mag-isang dibdib sina Cesar at Elsa, tila sila nang may pinakamasayang pagsasama. Lumipas ang mga taon, matutuklasan nila na walang forever.
Hindi ba ako pagod? Nag-drop out sa kolehiyo ang anak mong lalaki at alas 3 pa lang ng madaling araw nagtatrabaho na sa